All right, get ready, because today we're going deep on something super powerful, something you use every day without even realizing it: storytelling.
We're talking way more than just bedtime stories here. You ready to figure out how stories help us understand the world, make you super persuasive, and maybe even win over that stubborn coworker who never seems to agree with you?
Our guide for this deep dive is Annette Simmons and her book, The Story Factor. Ever notice how some speeches or presentations just stick with you? You walk out and you're like, whoa!
Or how some people are just ridiculously convincing.
Yeah.
They've probably tapped into this secret weapon, storytelling.
Hmm.
And the coolest part, it's not magic, it's a skill you can learn.
Okay, so Simmons starts off with this big idea. Stories actually help us make sense of this crazy world.
Yeah, might sound kind of obvious at first, but think about how much info is coming at you every single day. It's a lot. A good story creates a framework, helps you organize all that chaos into something relatable, something you can remember.
Like when you hear someone else is dealing with the same problem you are, and suddenly you're not alone anymore.
Exactly. Simmons uses this example. Imagine you're trying to convince your coworker to, stop sending those reply all emails with sensitive info.
Ugh, yeah, we've all been there. Or worse, been that coworker.
So you could just tell them to be more careful.
Right.
But what if you told them a story about someone who, accidentally leaked data and got fired?
Ouch.
Which one do you think hits harder?
Yeah, the story definitely makes you feel those consequences. A lecture just doesn't do that. It makes it real. Stories make ideas real.
What's really interesting is stories can apply to so many situations. You know how you give someone advice and it's just for their one problem?
Yeah.
Stories aren't like that. The lesson can apply to a bunch of different problems.
Hmm.
That coworker might start being more careful about all their communication, not just emails, because the story made them feel the risk.
Okay, stories are powerful, but how do we actually tell them well? I can't just wave a magic wand and captivate everyone. There's got to be some technique.
Simmons compares it to acting. Your voice, your expressions, your hands, they're all part of it. It's creating an experience, not just reciting words.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. Think about using vivid language. Create images in the listener's mind. Maybe even throw in some sound effects or change your voice. You're painting with your words.
So instead of just saying we had a big family, I might describe the chaos of 10 grandkids running around, the smell of grandma's lasagna, the sound of laughter. Suddenly, it's not just an idea, it's a scene you can picture.
You got it. Those details are what make the story come alive, make it stick.
All right, you ready for a challenge? Simmons says to be a master influencer, you need to have 6 types of stories ready.
Yep, she's got this framework of 6 essential stories, and each one has a different purpose. It's all about connecting with your audience.
Okay, 6 stories. I'm already feeling overwhelmed. But all right, lay 'em on me. Let's hear about these storytelling must-haves.
Story number 1, the who you are story.
So your origin story, what makes you you, where you come from, what you believe in.
Exactly. Building trust by showing your human side. People connect with knowing there's a real person behind the message.
Makes sense. What about number 2?
That's your why you're there story. Connecting your purpose to what your audience needs.
So they know why they should even listen to you.
Exactly. Why does this even matter to them? This is where you answer that.
It's hey, I'm here because I get it, I understand you, I'm here to help.
Yeah, exactly. Story number 3 is about the future. The vision story.
Ooh, this one sounds inspiring.
It is. Instead of just goals and objectives, you paint a picture of the future. A future you and your audience can make together.
Make them feel like they're part of something bigger.
Right. So you're not just saying, we need more sales. You're describing what success looks like, how it feels. Maybe even share a story about a time you overcame something similar.
I like it. Okay, what about those aha moments?
That's where the teaching story comes in.
Okay, so we're sharing wisdom and knowledge, but in a way that people will remember.
Think back to, a mentor sharing a story about their biggest mistake. That lesson probably stuck with you longer than any lecture could.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the power of a good teaching story.
Okay, what's next on the list?
Number 5 is the values and action story. Showing how those big ideas, like integrity, actually translate into real life.
So instead of just saying integrity is important, you tell a story about a time you had to make a tough decision.
You got it. And finally, we have the I know what you're thinking story.
This one sounds kind of psychic.
It's all about knowing what your audience might be thinking, those objections they have, and addressing them right away. But in a story, it builds trust. Shows you get where they're coming from.
So you don't wait for them to interrupt with a concern. You address it with a story that shows you've thought about it.
Exactly.
Wow, 6 stories to master. I'm struggling to remember what I had for breakfast, but okay, I see why this framework is so powerful. It covers, like, everything. Building trust, inspiring action, the whole deal.
We don't really think about it much, but stories are one of the most powerful tools we have, like to get people to do things. Ever thought about why they're so persuasive?
I mean, not really. It's like you hear a good story and you're hooked, right? But now I'm kind of curious. What is it about stories? Why do we drop our skepticism and just listen?
Well, Simmons says there are 3 main reasons. First, stories help us overcome suspicion. When someone's trying to convince you of something, you naturally put up your guard.
Yeah, especially nowadays when everyone's trying to sell you something, you're just like, okay, what's the catch?
Right. But a well-told story can kind of sneak past that skepticism. It creates this sense of shared experience. Like instead of someone lecturing at you, you're both on the same side, going on a journey together.
Oh, I like that. Like you're both sitting around a campfire sharing stories instead of on a debate stage yelling at each other.
That's a great way to put it. Second reason, stories make a connection, a real one. When you hear a story that really gets to you, you feel seen, understood.
This reminds me of when I was starting out in my career. I was so nervous about presentations. Then my mentor told me this story about how he totally bombed his first big one, like full tech fail, awkward silence, the whole thing. Hearing that, I didn't feel so alone in being scared. Is that kind of what Simmons is getting at with this connection thing?
Totally. Sharing that vulnerability is powerful stuff. It creates trust. And you need that if you want to really persuade someone. And that leads to reason number 3, stories. Lower your defenses. When we're into a story, our brains, stop overthinking. We just absorb the message.
We let our guard down and get swept away.
Exactly. And a good story can stick with you for a long time, days, weeks, even years. It gets in your memory and feels like you were actually there, even if you weren't.
It's like hypnosis, which makes sense, I guess, because stories use that part of our brain that doesn't always think logically. Our emotions.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes stories such a powerful tool for influencing behavior.
So this all sounds great if everyone's already agreeing with you. But what about the tough crowds? The skeptics? The people who just love to argue? Can stories work on them too?
That's a great question. Simmons has a 2-step approach for even the most resistant audiences.
Okay, I'm ready. What's the secret? How do you win over those tough cookies?
First, understanding. Even if you totally disagree with someone, you have to see things from their side. Acknowledge their feelings, their worries.
So don't just ignore what they're saying, show them you get it, even if you disagree.
Yeah, exactly. And the second step is positivity. Instead of all the negative stuff, the guilt trips, focus on hope, common goals, a better future.
Find that common ground, that bit of optimism that brings everyone together, even if you disagree on the details.
You got it. Oh, and Simmons has another technique. If they're really not budging, tell another story that deals with their specific issue.
Interesting. So if they don't trust your company's commitment to sustainability, you might share a story about how you saw firsthand the good things your company is doing for the environment.
Exactly. Go that extra mile, make that connection, show them you've really thought about their concerns.
Okay, so far it's all about telling stories, but Simmons also talks about the power of listening to them. That's not something I'd ever considered before.
Yeah, we always think about talking, right? But being a good listener is just as important, especially when it comes to influence.
Yeah, it makes sense that would build trust. When you really listen to someone, you're hearing more than their words, you're understanding their whole perspective.
And that creates a real bond. Then they're more open to hearing what you have to say.
Like that classic car salesman, right? The one who actually listens to the customer complaining about some other car. Instead of just trying to sell them something, they take the time to understand them.
Exactly. They're not just a salesperson anymore. They're someone you can trust.
Yeah.
That makes all the difference. Listening to stories builds rapport.
Yeah.
It makes you credible.
Okay, we've covered a lot of do's when it comes to storytelling. Are there any don'ts? What are some things to avoid?
Definitely. Simmons talks about 3 big storytelling traps to watch out for.
Right, let's hear them. What are the no-nos?
The biggest one is don't act like you're better than everyone. No one likes a know-it-all, especially when it comes to stories.
Like the person who tells a story just to brag?
Yeah, it's not authentic. Instead, connect with people. Be real. Be honest about your struggles. Let them figure things out for themselves.
Be humble. Okay, what's the next one?
They'll be boring. We all have that friend, the one who tells these long, rambling stories that never end.
Oh, yeah, and you're just sitting there thinking, get to the point already.
Right. Keep it short, keep it interesting, use those vivid details we talked about. Make it an experience.
Make them feel like they're right there with you. Okay, last one. What's the final don't?
Don't focus on the negative. It's okay to talk about the tough stuff, but don't make people feel bad.
No guilt trips.
Right. Focus on hope, inspiration, positive change.
You know, that reminds me of that Lincoln quote, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" It's all about finding that common ground.
It's a great reminder that stories should bring people together, not tear them apart.
So we've talked about how stories can make us more persuasive and influential, but Simmons goes even further. She says becoming a good storyteller changes how we see ourselves, how we see the world.
It really does. She says when we really embrace storytelling, we start seeing our lives as a story.
Right.
And we can control it.
We're not just reacting to things. We can choose what happens next, how we react, who we are.
Exactly. It changes everything.
But of course, with great power comes great responsibility, right? We got to be careful about the stories we tell. They can really have a big impact.
Oh, for sure. Simmons says we need to use storytelling, like ethically. It can be used to shape how people think, how they act.
Yeah.
For good or bad.
Like Hitler, he used stories to spread fear and hate. It led to some of the worst things in history. It really shows how the stories we tell can have huge consequences.
It's definitely something to think about. Simmons talks about the importance of being genuine, being empathetic, remembering we're all human. Our stories should lift people up, inspire them.
Yeah, use our voices to make the world a better place, not tear people down.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the coolest ideas in the story factor. Story thinking.
Story thinking. Okay, how is that different from critical thinking? I feel like they're almost opposites.
It's a small but important difference. Critical thinking is all about logic, being objective, finding the right answer. Story thinking is more about feelings, those gray areas where there isn't always a right answer.
So instead of just looking at numbers and data, you're also thinking about the human side of things, the stories behind the numbers.
Exactly. Like let's say you're making a tough decision at work. Critical thinking would say, look at the spreadsheets, the projections. Story thinking says, what are the stories behind those numbers? Who are we helping? Who are we maybe not helping?
Whoa, I never thought of it that way. It's like story thinking adds a whole new level to how we solve problems.
Exactly. Simmons thinks story thinking is super important, especially nowadays. It's not about forgetting logic. It's about using intuition, empathy, stories to get a bigger picture.
Using both sides of our brain, the logic side and the creative side, to find better solutions.
Yeah. Story thinking makes us more creative, helps us connect with others and understand the world, in a more human way.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the story factor, I'm kind of amazed by how much more there is to storytelling than I realized. It's not just about entertainment. It's about understanding, connecting, even changing our lives.
It's a big part of what makes us human.
And one of the most important things I've learned is that we're all storytellers. Every little thing we do, every choice, every experience, it all becomes part of our story.
And once you realize that, you can start choosing what kind of story you want to tell. To yourself and to everyone else.
We can focus on the good, what we've learned, being hopeful.
And when we share those stories, we inspire others to do the same.
So to everyone listening out there, here's a question for you. What story are you living right now?
And how can you use storytelling to make it even better? A story that's meaningful, that makes a difference, that's truly you.
If you want to learn more about all this, definitely check out The Story Factor by Annette Simmons. It's a really great book.
It is. And remember, we all have the power of storytelling inside us. It's time to use it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep telling those stories.